Welcome to College Smart Radio, helping you bring into focus the true cost of college and how to tackle the runaway cost of financing a college education. College Smart Radio is hosted by Beatrice Schultz, a certified financial planner and founder of Westface College Planning. Now, here's your host for College Smart Radio, Beatrice Schultz.
Do you have questions about how the college financial aid system works? Questions like, I probably don't qualify for aid. Should I apply anyway? Do I need to be admitted before I can apply for financial aid at a particular university? Why is the family contribution listed on the SAR different from the family contribution expected by the university? I got an outside scholarship. Should I report it to the financial aid office? And many more questions. On today's College Smart Radio program, I have a seasoned college financial aid expert as my guest. We'll be discussing answers to the most common questions about financial aid. Hi, I'm Beatrice Schultz. Welcome to our weekly show, College Smart Radio, where we help you tackle the runaway costs of a college education. Our show is all about bringing up-to-date and practical advice to parents who are dealing with the cost of a college education for their kids. With some private schools costing over $60,000 a year, a UC costing close to $35,000, and a California State University running $25,000, parents need more help than ever. We bring you that help by sharing ways to pay less, tapping into financial aid, and prioritizing your source of funds to make sure you get through the most expensive years of your life. Based on my own education and experience, I share my insights with you week in and week out. I'm a certified financial planner and the owner of the San Carlos-based college planning business, Westface College Planning. I host educational workshops on college planning and consult with parents on a daily basis. And I bring in experts in many areas of the college process. From counselors, financial aid officers, student coaches, parents, and even students, you'll learn firsthand the ins and outs of how to pay for college and survive financially. In addition to our show, you can find lots of powerful information at our website, www.collegesmartradio.com. We have many articles that I've authored with up-to-date information on navigating the waters of paying for the runaway cost of college. We have a monthly e-newsletter full of content about college planning. We also have posted a glossary of key terms used in the world of college planning, terms like total cost of attendance, FAFSA, net price calculator, and so forth. And we have a link to our free community parent workshops and webinars that I host to teach parents about how to pay for college and how the financial aid system really works. Let's get started with today's show. My guest on today's College Smart Radio show is Sam Collie, a senior consultant for client services at Evans Consulting Group. Evans Consulting is a company that provides financial aid management solutions for colleges and universities to help schools manage their financial aid operations. Prior to joining Evans Consulting Group in 2011, Sam worked in financial aid for over 20 years. He began his financial aid career at Portland State University, where over a 16-year period, he moved from a counselor assistant director position to director of financial aid and ultimately to executive director of admissions, financial aid, registration, and records. Sam has a master's of public administration from Portland State University and a bachelor of science in economics from Oregon State University. Sam's joining us via phone from Vancouver, Washington today. Hi, Sam. Welcome to College Smart Radio.
Thanks very much for having me, Beatrice.
Thanks so much for joining us. Let's start by talking a little bit about the financial aid system from a high level. What is it? How is it regulated or audited at the government and college level?
Well, the financial aid system as we know it today, at least the federal system, stems from the Higher Education Act of 1965, and it's been amended over the years by Congress. And it's a system that allows families across the country to apply for federal financial aid programs, Title IV of the Higher Education Act. And just to give a little perspective, I think there's around the country people think that aid is not available, but that's actually not the case. In the 2011-2012 award year, over 31 million FAFSAs were received by the U.S. Department of Education. Also, in the 2011-12 award year, over $173 billion of Title IV funds were dispersed to students and families. So there's really aid out there.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's important that families understand that there's aid available. And maybe you can just explain what Title IV represents.
Title IV is a section of the Higher Education Act which speaks specifically to the federal financial aid programs. And those programs encompass grants, loans, and federal work study. And the Higher Education Act and the regulations written by the U.S. Department of Education guide the administration of financial aid, and colleges and universities across the country follow those guidelines to administer and disperse aid to students.
So in your role with Evans Consulting and also other companies that do it, there's kind of an auditing process, or there's sort of consulting available to make sure colleges are following the proper procedures in order to make sure that the right kids are getting financial aid. Is that a proper assessment?
Yeah, it is. In fact, that's probably something that people don't realize, is that there's an accountability system in place for all the federal funds, and the institutions that receive federal funds have a fiduciary responsibility to administer and disperse those funds according to the law and regulation. And every school across the country, whether a public, a private, community college, a proprietary school, has to have an annual college audit for Title IV programs, and that audit stems from direction given by the Office of Management and Budget, and then those audits are rolled up into the U.S. Department of Education yearly.
So there's, just for the audience, there's a real clear process that goes through determining or following the proper formula for each college to determine how much financial aid is going to be available for their students. Now, how much do the schools make those decisions and they use their calculators, or does that come directly from the government when the student submits the FAFSA?
Well, that's a really good question, because it depends. In the case of the Pell Grant, for example, the maximum is set by Congress yearly according to funding levels that the Congress determines and the President signs. In the case of 3 campus-based aid programs, Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, Federal Work Study, and the Perkins Loan programs, the colleges get a level of funding, and then they decide, per the federal guidelines that are given to colleges, how much in each of those programs a student may receive who's eligible.
So it's a pretty confusing process.
It can be very, very confusing to students and parents, especially the first time.
Well, let's talk. At the beginning of the show, I promised that we'd review kind of the typical parent questions about the financial aid system that you've kind of run into through your career in relations to the financial aid directly with the consumer or with the clients. I thought we could go through some of those examples, but I did want to start with that overall discussion so people understand that this really is a federal program that has some pretty clear guidelines that all these colleges are following, and part of what the student needs to and parents need to do is make sure they follow their part of the guidelines to qualify for everything that they can.
Yeah, that's really very important, because the colleges, every college financial aid office, all the colleges' offices want those students to attend and be successful. And a lot of times families are frustrated by the process because they think that the school has the ultimate decision about how much money a student can get and the different types of programs a student can get. But unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess if you're a taxpayer, those guidelines are regulated, and the colleges do have some leeway, again, in the financial aid, campus-based aid programs to follow the regulations and select some students. But in the case of Pell Grant, the federal loans, et cetera, those are pretty strict guidelines, and the colleges have to follow those guidelines.
So for the parents that are listening in and have a pen and paper ready, some of them are in the car, so don't write anything. Where do they start?
I think the best place to start is the U.S. Department of Education site, and they've just revamped it, and it's very user-friendly, and it's www.studentaid.gov. And that site has information about everything from the programs themselves, how to apply, and even information about for students who are getting ready to graduate and thinking about how they're going to repay their loans and things like that. And from that site, a student and family can move right to the FAFSA on the web. FAFSA is a free application for federal student aid, and the student and one parent can fill out the FAFSA on the web. It's a web-based application. One student and or the student and one parent can sign that by establishing a PIN number, and then once they do that and pick the colleges that they think they want to attend, then that FAFSA record is processed by the U.S. Department of Education and then routed to the schools that the student identifies on the FAFSA.
So for our audience that's not familiar even with the term FAFSA, which is the free application for federal student aid, that FAFSA asks them questions about their assets and income and their family situation, and mostly questions that parents would have on hand, but I always encourage to make sure you answer those questions correctly because they are going to directly impact whether you qualify for any of that aid.
Yeah, and that's a really good point because especially for first-time first-time families who fill out the FAFSA, it can be very confusing because there's several sections on the FAFSA, and you're exactly right. It asks personal information. It asks for an email address so the school can communicate to the student. It asks about the parent's income, the student's income, assets. Not all assets are included. And then there's a federal formula in place that's been modified by Congress over the years. And that federal formula determines from the information on the FAFSA how much the family is able to pay for school. And that is commonly known as the expected family contribution. And then the school uses that expected family contribution to determine how much money in each federal financial aid program that the student may receive. And there's a very simple formula that determines need for a student. Every college uses the same formula, although every college cost is a little different. And that formula is costs minus EFC, or expected family contribution, equals need. And so the college tries to give the student as much money as possible to fill that student's need.
Just for our listeners, I'll have that U.S. Department of Education website available on my website, collegesmartradio.com. And also, the definition of need is one of the definitions that's in my glossary in the College Smart Radio, on the College Smart Radio website. So feel free to definitely use that as a reference. So what does the college do, or how do they verify? Do they verify the information? What happens next when they're processing the FAFSA, so to speak?
Well, and that's another really good question because it depends on the circumstances and the information that is on the student's FAFSA.
I apologize, Sam. I gave you that question too quickly. We're going to have to take a quick break here. You're with us on College Smart Radio, where my guest today is a financial aid expert, Sam Collie from Evans Consulting Group, and a former executive director of admissions, financial aid, and registration and records at Portland State University. We'll be right back after a quick break.
For more information on today's topic, visit collegesmartradio.com or call area code 650-587-1559. College Smart Radio continues in moments on AM 1220 KDOW. Contact Beatrice Schultz at collegesmartradio.com or call area code 650-587-1559. Now, back to College Smart Radio with your host Beatrice Schultz on AM 1220 KDOW.
Welcome back to College Smart Radio, where we help you tackle the runaway costs of college. I'm Beatrice Schultz. We all know that college is expensive and will most likely be some of the most costly years for a family. Understanding how to navigate the college costs is a smart thing to know. To help families be on this radio show, I host community workshops, live and via webinar, several times a month that explain the costs of various colleges, how the financial aid system works, and things to consider to prepare yourself for this tremendous expense. To learn more and reserve your seat, go to my website, collegesmartradio.com. If you've just joined us, my guest on today's College Smart Radio show is Sam Collie, a senior consultant for Evans Consulting Group and a former executive director of admissions, financial aid, registration, and records at Portland State University. We've been discussing the financial aid system and the process to qualify. Sam, we were just talking about the FAFSA verification process before I rudely interrupted you, so I'll let you continue that thought. Thanks.
Okay. Well, just a quick bit of information for families, because a lot of people say, well, I filled out the FAFSA, but what happens now? Once you fill out the FAFSA, and there's an electronic record that goes to each school that the student puts on the FAFSA, and that school begins to process the information. And really, think about it as kind of a two-lane highway going on the freeway the same direction, and then think about getting on an off-ramp, if you will. There's two streams of FAFSA information. one stream, the school does not have to ask you any questions at all, and you just keep going down the freeway until the school sends you an award letter. And then there's the other track where the school has to ask you some sort of question about your FAFSA, and that can be because the federal processor that is a contractor for the U.S. Department of Education has selected the student's record for verification. Then the family has to provide some information about the FAFSA, and sometimes the school has to ask other questions before they can make an award letter. So once all those questions are resolved, the school can make an award offer to the student, and then the student can decide whether to attend based upon that award letter.
One of the questions that I'm hearing the most from so many of my families today, including those that are away at college and are now going into their second and third years, is all this discussion in the news about the student loan interest rates. Can you give us a little bit of overview of what's going on, the fact that it's not impacting every loan, or will it, and just kind of give us a feeling of where you think this is going to go, or if we even know yet?
Well, yes, I can. And interestingly enough, congressional leaders have gotten together with the president, and it looks like there's a solution on the table. But let's just backtrack a second and talk about what this issue has really been. There's been in the headlines a discussion about the student loan rates doubling, but that's not completely accurate, because the doubling of interest rates really has been affecting the subsidized Stafford loan, and subsidized Stafford loans are available to undergraduate students. And right before July 1st, the rate was 3.4%, and currently the rate is 6.8%. Congress has just met, and there's no change in law yet, but it looks like there's a solution that will be coming out that will reduce the rates at least until 2015 for all students and parents, but the rates will be slightly higher than they have been in the past. But we don't have final information yet.
So for our listeners that are kind of sitting on pins and needles as far as planning for the loan, remember this is the interest part of the loan, and you do have to pay back the principal part of the loan. So although it's expensive and the interest rate matters, you still want to be real careful about how many loans you do take out.
That's correct. It's very important, and actually, per the regulatory guidance, if the student qualifies for the need-based subsidized loan, the college must offer that loan to the student first, and then the student can borrow an unsubsidized loan. And then if that's not enough, based upon the college's cost and other aid, there's also a provision for parent loans. And at the graduate level, there's graduate loans and what they call graduate plus loans at the graduate level also.
Sam, can you give a quick overview of the difference between a subsidized loan and an unsubsidized loan, which is only available to undergraduate students, correct?
Yeah, it's really, really simple. It's subsidized loans are loans where the government is basically deferring the interest for the student borrower while the student is in school and during a 6-month grace period. And when I was on a campus, I always explained to my students that the 6-month grace period did not start with graduation. It started with when the student exited school, whether the student graduated or not. And actually, the unsubsidized loan also has a 6-month grace period, but the interest is accruing while the student is in school and during the grace period.
So if the last day of school is April 15th, it's 6 months after April 15th, or is there a formal day that would be like the last day of school for Portland State in that example?
It's basically the last date of attendance that the student attends that starts that 6-month break. Now, a lot of times, people don't realize, but the grace period is actually, let's say a student is a junior and goes away for summer and then comes back before that 60-day time period has ended. The grace period has actually begun, but as soon as the student re-enrolls before the grace period is over, then it starts over again.
Okay, that's a good explanation. And how about the difference between the subsidized and unsubsidized?
Well, the basic difference is that the unsubsidized is not being, the interest is accruing while the student's in school and during the grace period. So basically the interest, it becomes a more expensive loan. The student borrower does have an option to make an interest payment monthly when the student signs a master promissory note for the loan. However, a lot of students don't do that because they need that extra money for school.
So who's paying the interest, or how's the interest being taken care of for the subsidized loan while the student's in college or attending?
Well, for the subsidized loan, it's basically being deferred by the federal government. So basically, you can think about it in the most simple way and say that the U.S. taxpayer is paying for it if you think about it that way. But basically, it's a deferred interest that is not being calculated to the student while the student's in school. So the subsidized loan is a lower cost loan if you think about it in terms of life of the loan than the unsubsidized loan, because interest is not accruing while the student is in school.
Yes, so for any families that see on their award letter that they're offered some subsidized and some unsubsidized, you want to take those subsidized first. Those are going to end up costing your student less. And traditionally, they have had a lower interest rate, but even if the interest rate's the same, it's better off if you don't have to pay interest while your student is a student in college.
That's right. Yeah, the subsidized loan is always the best deal.
So let's talk a little bit about the grants that are available through the government. And then I also, if you're willing, I want to hear talk a little bit about additional grants that may be available through the college, and where does that money come from? Okay,
great. Well, the primary grant that's available to students, and it's need-based, is the Pell Grant. For 2013-14, the maximum Pell Grant will be $5,656, and the minimum $582. The Pell Grant is the foundation grant, if you will, of financial aid, and every student who's an undergraduate student who applies and has need can get that. There's also one of the three campus-based aid programs, Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, which is, again, an allocation of funds directly to the college, and then the college awards the grant according to the federal guidelines. And that grant is earmarked for Pell Grant eligible students with the highest need, basically. And then there's also state grants. In California, there's a Cal Grant program. Since I was an aid administrator in Oregon, there's an Oregon Opportunity Grant. Most states have a state grant program. And when the student applies with the FAFSA, they're also sending information to their state grant authority, so the state grant authority can determine whether the student is eligible for the state grant.
In California, with the Cal Grant system, it's more generous than the Pell Grant in the sense that families with need, but not as much of a need that would qualify for the Pell Grant, may qualify for the Cal Grant, but not for the Pell Grant. I don't know if that's the same in most states.
It's similar. Mm-hmm. Every state has their criteria, if you will, and in Oregon, it's not as the Oregon Opportunity Grant is not as complex as the Cal Grant. There's multiple parts to the Cal Grant, and that's not the case in Oregon. Not the case in some states, and in others it is. It depends on whether the state is a large state, a small state. How much money is available through the state budget.
Sure. Before we go on to the actual school-specific grants or scholarships, let's talk about all of the government financial aid programs. So the next financial aid program would be, we've talked about the loans, but the third one, I guess, would be the work-study program. Can you share a little bit about that?
I can, and I really like work-study. It's again, one of the three federal campus-based aid programs, which means the school gets an allocation of funds to award to students. And the work-study program is a great program because it allows the student to have part of their financial aid award in work study. And what work study means is the student gets an award of work study and then can use that work study award to get a job on campus. And many campuses have work study opportunities available off campus also. They sign contracts with different entities. And the work study program is great because a lot of those jobs a student can get in their field of study, let's say work in a biology lab, or if it's a pre-med student and there's a hospital nearby, maybe work in a research lab or something like that. It's a great program. It allows the student to work and get a monthly paycheck, and it helps to keep the borrowing down. So it's a great program.
The work study is a great program. I encourage kids. It's just a check mark on your FAFSA to get access to be considered for a work study program if you may qualify. Sam, we've come to the end, but thank you so much for joining us on College Smart Radio and sharing your expertise on the financial aid system with us today.
Okay, thank you very much for having me.
Well, that wraps up another weekly show of College Smart Radio. We hope you picked up some new information today that helps you figure out ways to manage the runaway costs of college. You can hear us each week here on KDOW 1220 AM, Saturdays at 3 p.m. We promise to bring you up-to-date information from the front lines of helping parents deal with the most expensive years of their lives. For a link to a podcast of this show and our prior weekly show, go to our website, collegesmartradio.com. In addition to the podcast, you'll also find a schedule of our upcoming shows. You can also plan to join us at one of our upcoming Westface College planning workshops and webinars. You do need to reserve your seat for a workshop, and you can do so from my show's website, collegesmartradio.com. This is Beatrice Schultz. Thanks for tuning in to College Smart Radio. We look forward to sharing more helpful information with you next week.
You've been listening to College Smart Radio with certified financial planner Beatrice Schultz. If you have questions on today's topic, log on to collegesmartradio.com or call area code 650-587-1559. That's 650-587-1559. Join us next week at this time for another edition of College Smart Radio on AM 1220 KDOW.